Now, if some people have organized a system for their genetic survival, what's the chance that they're going to give that system up? None. See, they worked hard. And we can consider it unjust. It's the most unjust system that has ever been devised on the planet, where you have 1/10 of the people deciding that they need to control 9/10 of the people on the planet. But all along, I maintain we have not understood this. We thought when we were formerly enslaved, if they would just take off the chains, everything is going to be okay. So they removed the chains, and then what did they do next? They put laws in place to accomplish the same thing. And we went through the 1960s in what is being called the Civil Rights era. And the black people, with all of their dignity and their pride and their courage, going up against horses and hoses and dogs to get the vote, to get that change, coming out of that movement, saying black pride, black is beautiful, black power, black self-respect. And the people who had something else in mind said that's dangerous. If people are talking about self-respect and dignity, and I encourage everybody to look at the films Eye on the Prize, and look at those black people, men and women and children, going up against a horrific force. But they were determined and they had their self-respect with them. But the system said, this is dangerous. If we let these people go forward, talking about black pride, black dignity, black is beautiful, we will be in trouble.
Sanger called for the implementation of such programs in the United States, specifically targeting African Americans. The following editorial was published in the 1932 issue of the Birth Control Review.
The Negro problem is one of the most complicated and important confronting America. Whatever the ultimate answer may be, such an attitude brings to light the function of birth control as a necessary agency in its solution. The present submerged condition of the Negro is due in large part to the high fertility of the race under disastrously adverse circumstances. Thus, the question arises, to what extent birth control has had a eugenic effect upon the Negro race.
If any question should remain about Sanger's racist agenda, a 1939 letter she wrote to Dr. Clarence Gamble should remove all doubt.
We should hire 3 or 4 colored ministers, preferably with social service backgrounds and with engaging personalities. The most successful educational approach to the Negro is through a religious appeal. We don't want the word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population. And the minister is a man who can straighten out that idea if it ever occurs to any of their more rebellious members.
Can there be any wonder why Planned Parenthood opens its facilities in poor inner-city neighborhoods populated by minorities? Can there be any doubt that Sanger's philosophy of creating a pure race is what fuels Planned Parenthood's support of embryonic stem cell research? Margaret Sanger was a racist. She's responsible for the millions of babies that have been ethnically cleansed from our country and should not be celebrated by the taxpayer-funded Smithsonian.
Well, Margaret Sanger was a devout racist, and that's what people need to know first. And her ideology was one, of course, that we are now finding out more and more today, that basically stemmed from Darwinism, that the survival of the fittest, and that a master race more or less should be bred, and that African Americans, Australians, and other ethnicities that they deemed were inferior needed to be either exterminated or their numbers reduced greatly. She was very profound woman, but yet jaded. And we find that she was relentless in her pursuit of this ideology being implemented in modern society. And so she birthed the Negro Project with the sole purpose of introducing sterilization and abortion to the African American community, and to do it in such a way that they would not be suspicious of her true master plan, and that was to sterilize and reduce the numbers of the community. And she also tutored some of the best, Adolf Hitler. She was a member of the Eugenics Society. She was more, Adolf Hitler commended her for her help in his initiation of his eugenics program, of course, in Europe. And so she has quite, impressive credentials when it comes to the ideology she espoused. And she had members of the Third Reich on her board. It was amazing that no one ever suspected or investigated this woman's background and associations earlier, even during that time. But it was unspoken, it was well censored, it's been the best kept secret in America, but right now it's really coming to light more so than ever before. She was brilliant in her strategy. She also perceived that if you're going to reach the African American, you have to do it from a religious persuasion. You would have to be cleared through the leadership of the church. And so she told Clarence Gamble, the heir of Procter & Gamble, that we ought to hire 3 or 4 colored ministers with engaging personalities and from social service backgrounds to make sure, more or less to be the face of it, to make sure that if anyone should suspect anything, that they would be able to quell any suspicions from the congregation or the people. And so, but that was very insightful insight, and that is how our community, even today, if you look at sociologically speaking, the most respected person in the African American community is still the preacher. Believe it or not, it's still the preacher. And second, the doctor. Third, the politician. She perceived that early and went out and began to commandeer clergy. As a matter of fact, they had contests where they awarded preachers who would give the best sermon to basically to facilitate this plan for the Negro Project, a eugenics sermon, so to speak. And they were awarded money, and but yet, unfortunately, it didn't really take root as she would like it to until, of course, 1973. Well, I can say as far as the Planned Parenthood, they have a board of clergy. Recently in Portland, they opened up a mega killing station, and it was clergy present at the inauguration. Once again, this allows it to appear to be socially acceptable when you put a cleric in front with a collar and is talking about the good social good this is going to do for the community. And unfortunately, we're not looking beneath the surface. We have to understand that Planned Parenthood is very good at putting a very, very acceptable veneer on their true agenda, and you have to dig. But upon digging, you'll be horrified to know that they are only fulfilling an ideology that began with its inception, which is Margaret Sanger's eugenic plan to exterminate, to reduce, to create genocide with nationalities or ethnic groups that they felt were inferior. The key thing to understand is that this is what they believe. I used to believe that this was all about money. Now it is about money for many, but with the core group of eugenics believers and the brain trust of Planned Parenthood, it's ideology. Of course, at this time, as stated previously, they already had very strong ties with the Third Reich in Germany, and all the attention was on Germany. And of course, as that progressed, we saw the atrocities. You could see the mutilations of ethnic groups, and basically, which was focused on at that time by the media, it was the Jews, but through further research, we find it was also many African Americans. As a matter of fact, Hitler blamed the Jew for bringing African Americans into Europe, and because he was very much concerned about the pureness of the Aryan race. So as we know that World War II ended and many people were enlightened on Hitler's ways and means, and one of the things Hitler would do, he was very keen on phraseology also, just as Eugenics Society had taught its perpetrators to be feeble-minded, slowful, criminal. All these are words that society understood, and they were basically detrimental, and so you're not going to rush to the aid of the feeble-minded. And Hitler used one called useless eaters, and it was totally accepted by the German people, and he began his eugenics genocide, and it was first with the infirmed. They were not contributing to society, and so after desensitizing the society about their worth, he then realized he had reached to the point where he could continue and go forth with his plan. Of course, as you know, the world was aghast as the stench from the concentration camps and the stories began to pour out from soldiers who were liberating these camps. And so eugenics became a dirty word by the end of the war. And so Margaret Sanger was not deterred from her agenda. She realized she had to change the name from the Birth Control League to something that'd be more acceptable by society. And so therefore was birthed Planned Parenthood. And the ideology the same, the players still the same, the Eugenics Society still very much deeply involved. The only thing changed was the name, Planned Parenthood.
Some reports began coming out that attempted to put a happy face on eugenics, and many of them were written by people that were associated with Planned Parenthood. The strategy here was obvious. Since the Nazis had turned eugenics into a four-letter word, the American eugenics movement decided it was time to lay low. So most of their writings during this time period downplayed the role of eugenics and couched their agenda in terms of helping the African American. Perhaps the best example of this is a 1,500-page book by eugenicist Gunnar Myrdal called An American Dilemma, The Negro Problem in Modern Democracy. Interestingly, this book was not the result of some mom-and-pop operation. Myrdal had 75 assistants working on this project whose salaries were being paid for by the Carnegie Corporation, and Carnegie had been a major player in the eugenics movement for many years.
Gunnar Myrdal and his wife Alva were both involved in eugenics. They were funded by both the Rockefeller Foundation and the Carnegie Corporation. They were also closely linked to a Swedish eugenics program which forcibly sterilized 66,000 people. When you read chapter 7 of this book, it becomes undeniable that this is a blueprint for the modern eugenics movement that we still see in the United States today. The bottom line is that Gunnar Myrdal believed that not only could blacks not help themselves, he felt that nobody could help them, and the only solution in his eyes was to get rid of them.
Commonly, it is considered a great misfortune for America that Negro slaves were ever imported. The presence of Negroes in America today is usually considered a plight of the nation. Chapter 7, page 167. All white Americans agree that if the Negro is to be eliminated, he must be eliminated slowly, so as not to hurt any living individual Negroes. Chapter 7, page 168. The only way possible of decreasing Negro population is by means of controlling fertility. Chapter 7, page 170. Birth control facilities could be extended relatively more to Negroes than to whites, since Negroes are more concentrated in the lower income and education classes. Chapter 7, page 176.
I consider that the world and almost our civilization for the next 25 years is going to depend upon a simple, cheap, safe contraceptive to be used in poverty-stricken slums, jungles, and among the most ignorant people. Even this will not be sufficient, because I believe that now, immediately, there should be national sterilization for certain dysgenic types of our population who are being encouraged to breed and would die out were the government not feeding them. Margaret Sanger, 1950.
This was written by Sanger in a personal letter to Catherine Dexter McCormick. McCormick was an heir to the international harvester fortune and would later use part of her immense wealth to fund the development of the birth control pill. In 1934, Adolf Hitler sent a letter to American eugenicist Leon Whitney, complimenting him for a book he had written on sterilization. Whitney was the former executive secretary of the American Eugenics Society and a colleague of Margaret Sanger's. Sanger also published his writings in the Birth Control Review.
In the book that Hitler was praising, Whitney had written that America could eliminate what he called the slum elements of society by sterilizing the lowest 25% of its population. He claimed this was necessary because such people are too stupid to understand or practice even simple methods of contraception. Besides, he said, the country would hardly miss them. One of the people he was talking about was named Elaine Riddick.
At the age of 13, I became pregnant. I was raped by a guy that lived across the street from me. He snatched me off the street and molested me and threatened my life and said if I ever told anyone that he would kill me. When they was delivering my son, they sterilized me at the same time. They had approached my grandmother and said that if she wanted to continue to receive supplement, welfare and food stamps, or at this time they was giving out these surplus foods, canned cheese, I think it was, powdered eggs, and said that if she did not sign the X, that they were going to stop her supplements. Mind you, my grandmother was illiterate. She had never ever gone to school. She didn't understand what it was. So she signed the X and they did this to me. I did not find out that they had sterilized me until I was 19 years old. I asked the state of North Carolina why they did this to me, and they said that because I was feeble-minded, that I would not be able to take care of myself, I would not be able to tie my shoes, that I was just incompetent. The state of North Carolina also said that I had never performed, at the age of 13, I had never performed a day's work in my life. They couldn't get me to do anything. But at the age of 13, should I not have been in school? they were saying that feeble-mindedness is hereditary. So they sterilized me so I would not produce my kind. Mind you, I am not illiterate, nor am I feeble-minded. I never went into high school, but yet I still acquired a college degree. They also justified that my child or my children would be feeble-minded. My son is the president of his own semiconductor company. He has his own construction company. And he has his own real estate company. I mean, how can you think that your government allowed or allowing these things to happen to a person, a life? You can't say nothing, you have no rights. To me, they took away all of my rights. They sterilized kids from my understanding and my knowledge as young as 8 years of age. I don't know what an 8-year-old can do that could cause them to do this to them. The only reason I can give myself is that because they're black.
In 1961, social worker Sue Casebolt had been installed as the executive secretary of the North Carolina Eugenics Board. At a board meeting held 3 weeks later, she stated that she was going to keep a file on every child whose name reached her desk so that they could be picked up as soon as they reached childbearing age. Casebolt was still on the board in 1968 when it approved the sterilization of 14-year-old Elaine Riddick.
Contraceptives will become a form of drug warfare against the helpless in this nation. Jesse Jackson, 1971.
There is a campaign to bombard the poor with pills and potions. If this movement continues, we soon may be accused of fighting poverty by eliminating the poor and overcoming hunger by removing the hungry. New York Congressman Hugh Carey, 1966.
Under the cover of an alleged campaign to alleviate poverty, white supremacist Americans and their dupes are pushing an all-out drive to put rigid birth control measures into every black home. No such drive exists within the white American world. Black Unity Party, 1968.
Birth control and sterilization in the wrong hands would be more deadly to Negroes than all the tanks, riot guns, cattle prods, billy clubs, and shackles we have overcome in the past. Dr. Leroy Swift, obstetrician, gynecologist, 1968.
What would you say is now the #1 cause of death in the African American community?
Heart disease.
Oh, HIV/AIDS.
Diabetes, cancer, AIDS.
I'll say heart disease. AIDS.
From what I heard, it's probably AIDS, you know.
Probably heart disease.
I think heart disease.
HIV. Gang violence.
What if I told you the real answer was abortion?
Since 1973, legal abortion has killed more African Americans than AIDS, cancer, diabetes, heart disease, and violent crime combined. Every week, more blacks die in American abortion clinics than were killed in the entire Vietnam War. And the largest chain of abortion clinics in the United States is operated by Planned Parenthood.
We have now reached a point in this country that African American women, though they make up 12% of the population, they account for 37% of the abortions. An African American baby is almost 5 times more likely to be aborted than a white child. The abortion industry at this point kills as many African American people every 4 days as the Klan killed in 150 years. And you can truly say the most dangerous place for an African American to be is in the womb of their African American mother.
All across America, you can stand outside of the abortion clinics and see a steady stream of black women coming in and out. But somewhere along the way, we got the idea that this is a white issue or a conservative issue or a Republican issue, and therefore, it's not an issue that we have to be concerned about. This same attitude has allowed Planned Parenthood and other members of the abortion industry to carry out this genocide right under our very noses. Right now, in America, about half of our babies are being killed in the womb. And in certain parts of America, more of our babies are being aborted than are being born.
When 17,000 aborted babies were found in a dumpster outside of a pathology laboratory in Los Angeles, California, some 12 to 15,000 were observed to be black. Irma Clardy Craven, Chairman, Minneapolis Commission on Human Rights and Secretary of the Urban League.
To understand what the agenda was behind the legalization of abortion, all you need to do is look at the statistics from the U.S. government. Studies from the CDC show that prior to the legalization of abortion, approximately 80% of all illegal abortions were done on white women. One study in New York even found that white women had 5 times as many abortions as black women. But at the moment abortion became legal, that began to reverse. And that's why the legalization of abortion was so crucial for the eugenics movement. Legalization created the ability to market abortion in the black community. And from a eugenics standpoint, that changed everything.
These people cannot have it both ways. First, they say that birth control will reduce the number of abortions. Then they flood our neighborhoods with birth control clinics. And what's the result? Our abortion rate skyrockets. So either they lied about the fact that birth control would reduce abortions in our neighborhoods, or this is the results and the purpose they wanted from the beginning. At this point, I truly have the tendency to believe the latter.
Birth control and abortion are turning out to be the great eugenic advances of our time. Frederick Osborne, founding member of the American Eugenics Society, 1973.
The best way to hate a nigger is to hate him before he is born. Leander Perez, Louisiana State Judge, 1970.
Those whom we could not get rid of in the rice paddies of Vietnam, we now propose to exterminate if necessary, eliminate if possible, in the OB wards and gynecology clinics of our urban hospitals. Jesse Jackson, 1971.
Black people are the target of birth control, not because the ruling politicians like them and care about their economic equality, but because they hate them and can no longer use them in plantations and other cheap labor conditions. Muhammad Speaks, the Black Muslim newspaper, 1970.
I believe the entire question of abortions is just one more in the continuous series of events to eliminate the black population. Father George Clemens, Jet Magazine, 1973.
The abortion law hides behind the guise of helping women, when in reality it will attempt to destroy our people. Brenda Hyson, New York chapter, Black Panther Party, July 1970.
The racist tells you to take birth control pills to kill, to murder life that might have existed if you had not. They are planning mass extermination of people they consider dispensable. Dan Keyes, Oakland chapter, Black Panther Party, 1969.
A true revolutionary cares about the people. He cares to the point that he is willing to put his life on the line to help the masses of poor and oppressed people. He would never think of killing his unborn child. Detroit chapter, Black Panther Party, 1970.
Who the hell is getting the pill? The Mexican and the Negro. Do you want to wipe us out? Cesar Chavez, 1967.
The idea is to make less niggas so they won't have to build houses for them. If we keep producing, they're either gonna have to kill us or grant us full citizenship. Dr. Charles Greenlee, civil rights activist, 1968.
It is strange that they chose to start talking about population control at the same time that black people in America and people of color around the world are demanding their rightful place as human citizens and their rightful share of the material wealth in the world. Jesse Jackson, 1977.
It is interesting how everyone assumes that the pro-life movement in America began in 1973 with Roe versus Wade. But we who were around during the civil rights movement and struggle of the 1960s, we know that the first anti-abortion groups were organizations like the Black Panthers, the Nation of Islam, and other community organizations. These folks were speaking out against both birth control and abortion long before the contemporary pro-life groups of today existed. But one of the problems with the civil rights movement was that there was far too many men and women who were willing to sell out the community. And a lot of powerful, influential African Americans knew that they had to be willing to turn and look the other way in order to advance their own personal political agendas.
In 1972, those members of the Congressional Black Caucus, such as Charles Diggs, did not trust the abortion industry or those who were espousing population control or family health, and they were suspicious of them. But when the money began to flow, just as it was with Jesse Jackson, when he found out that indeed he could get funding and monies to run for presidents from these people, he flip-flopped in his position, because he once said abortion is black genocide. What happens to a mind of a person in the moral fabric of a nation that can abort a baby without a pang of conscience? Where will we be 20 years from today? But when Reverend Jesse Jackson realized he needed money to run for president, all of a sudden the most important civil rights issue is a woman's right to choose.
In 1975, Jesse Jackson called for the ban of abortion through a constitutional amendment. And in an interview in Jet magazine, he referred to abortion as genocide. But Jesse Jackson, on the other hand, wanted to become president. And the Democratic Party at that time had sold out completely to Planned Parenthood and the eugenics crowd. And Jesse Jackson went along to get along. And don't ever think that he was the only one. The unfortunate thing we face, whether we're talking about individuals or organization, there's never been a shortage of black leaders who are willing to sell us down the river if it's enough money and political power in it for them.
I've been grappling with the fact that the NAACP is in bed with the very organization that has brought black genocide to our community. Dr. Alveda King, the niece of Dr. Martin Luther King, has tried on at least 3 occasions to bring to this organization's attention the black genocidal plot of people like Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood to exterminate the black community. And the stonewalling has been astounding. Alveda King literally has gone to the street along with myself to say to the NAACP, please deal with this issue of black genocide. The NAACP has responded by hiding and trying to prevent their convention goers to hear about black genocide. They've even gone to the extent of using buses to block our demonstration about black genocide in front of Cobo Hall where their convention was going on. They have literally put black paper across their windows so that the convention goers at the NAACP convention could not see the demonstration going outside that included Alveda King. There is definitely a conspiratorial plot being hatched and has been hatched by the NAACP to keep from their people the fact that they are co-conspirators in the genocide of their own people.
When you look at the number of African Americans who portrayed us over the years, it's not always clear whether they are uninformed or just out-and-out traitors. When we see pro-choice politicians defending abortion on television, Do they really understand the implications of abortion and that it is certainly used for black genocide?
Reverend Benjamin Hooks, one of the former presidents of the NAACP, once personally told me that the NAACP would not bring this subject to the floor because they believed it would tear up the NAACP. Even the media has conspired with the NAACP to keep this issue from the attention of the black community and the public at large. I have seen the news media literally hide their trucks so that they would not be in a position to have to cover the demonstrations in front of Cobo Hall, only to bring them out after the demonstrators had left. This is an outrage that the black community is having the life of its babies destroyed, and the NAACP and the media are knowingly conspiring to keep this information from the public. This is an outrage, and it should be dealt with by every fair-minded American.
The civil rights elite has forgotten the lives of unborn black children and has joined those who choose to kill them. Unbelievable! They have forgotten that in the past, racists snatched black babies from their mother's arms and sold them into slavery. Today they snatch them from their mother's womb and throw them in the garbage. Ishmael Hernandez, Executive Director, African and Caribbean American Center, 2003.
When we look at this issue of civil rights leaders who sell out, even when they clearly know that birth control and abortion are being used for black genocide, we need to understand that by the 1960s, population control, especially black population control, had become almost a religion for America's white power structure. And from the start, they made it clear that if you crossed them, or if you challenged their agenda, they would chop you off at the knees. And that remains true to this day. Whether you're talking about the liberal social engineers who control the Democratic Party, or the wealthy elitists who control the Republican Party, or the media, or the academic community, these people have created a kind of family planning cartel that does not tolerate dissent. And they have always been especially ruthless about this when it comes to African Americans. A perfect example of this was seen in the case of Samuel Yet. Mr. Yet was an award-winning journalist who had earned a master's degree from Indiana University, was a U.S. Air Force veteran of the Korean War, and served as special assistant for civil rights to the director of the U.S. Office of Economic Opportunity. He was also a professor of journalism at Howard University and a columnist for several magazines and newspapers. In 1968, Yet had become the first African-American reporter hired by Newsweek magazine, and he quickly became their Washington, D.C. bureau correspondent. But then 3 years later, he wrote a book that exposed high-level plans within the United States to use birth control and abortion as instruments of black genocide. Then immediately after his book was released to the public, Yet was called into his supervisor's office and fired. At that meeting, he was informed that his dismissal had been orchestrated by the Nixon White House. The next year, Yet told the New York Times that pressure had been put on Newsweek to get him out of Washington. Then later, despite the fact that his book was selling well, had received at least 2 national awards, and was being used as a textbook in over 100 colleges, Yet's publisher dropped him and the book went off the market. What's important to recognize about this situation and others like it was that this family planning cartel was sending a message to those who might have influence within the African American community, whether they were politicians or journalists or college professors or civil rights leaders. They were being warned that when it comes to population control, they only had 2 options. They could either get on board with it or they could keep their mouths shut. And when people like Samuel Yet told them what they could do with their 2 options, they paid a price that few others had the character or the courage to pay.
The minister's work is also important, and also he should be trained, perhaps by the Federation, as to our ideals and the goal that we hope to reach. We do not want word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population, and the minister is the man who can straighten out that idea if it ever occurs to any of their more rebellious members.
In January of 1973, the Supreme Court legalized abortion on demand throughout the United States, and almost immediately, the Religious Coalition for Abortion Rights was formed.
Less than a year earlier, the following conversation had taken place in the Oval Office of the White House. It began on the 30th of March, 1972, and continued 4 days later on the 3rd of April. This is an actual recording of that conversation. The speakers are the President of the United States, Republican Richard Nixon, and members of his senior staff.
A majority of people in Colorado voted for abortion. I think a majority of people in Michigan are voting for abortion. I think in both cases, well, certainly in Michigan, they will vote for it because they think that what's going to be aborted generally are the little black substance. As I told you, we talked about it earlier, that a hell of a lot of people want to control the Negro bastard. Yeah. Isn't that very true? So we know what we're talking about, population control. Sure. We're talking really, and what John Rockefeller realizes. Look, the people in what we call our class control their populations. Sometimes they'll have a family of 6 or 7 or 8 or 9, but it's exception. The people who don't control their families are people the people that shouldn't have kids. Now that's the black population. Black in the city of San Francisco has gone from 3,000 right after World War II to where they represent 30% of the population of San Francisco. That's it.
The Religious Coalition for Abortion Rights was originally created with the financial backing of John Rockefeller, and its current president is an African American who was once appointed to the Washington, D.C. City Council by Richard Nixon. In the early 1990s, the organization changed its name and is today known as the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice.
In 1969, a meeting of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, also known as UNESCO, proposed that an American Population Commission be created with a, quote, large budget for propaganda, unquote. 4 months later, Republican President Richard Nixon signed legislation establishing the Commission on Population Growth and the American Future. The bill authorizing this new initiative had been passed with overwhelming support from congressional Democrats and was chaired by John Rockefeller. The executive director of the project was to be Dr. Charles F. Westhoff, who was also a member of both the American Eugenics Society and Planned Parenthood's National Advisory Council.
Another member of this new commission was Dr. Joseph Beasley. In the 1960s, Beasley oversaw an aggressive eugenics program that concentrated on black neighborhoods in New Orleans with the stated intention of lowering welfare costs. This project would eventually be described by Planned Parenthood President Alan Guttmacher as the #1 success story in the history of American birth control movement. It also led to Beasley being elected chairman of the board of Planned Parenthood in 1970. Then in 1975, Beasley was sent to federal prison for conspiring to defraud the U.S. government of $778,000 that had been allocated for the project. In court, a local black civil rights activist named Sherman Copeland testified that he took payoffs from Beasley for helping him to convince residents of the targeted neighborhoods that birth control was not black genocide.
In 1969, William H. Draper was appointed to represent the United States on the United Nations Population Commission. Draper had once proposed that government-sponsored population control efforts among the poor be accelerated in order to deal with racial unrest and to cure what he called the ghetto problem. Draper was on the governing body of Planned Parenthood and had personally raised more than $4 million for the organization.
That same year, a New York Times article about Planned Parenthood said the organization's board of directors was dominated by people who were both white and wealthy. The article went on to quote one of those board members as saying, "What it all comes down to is that we want the poor to stop breeding while we retain our freedom to have large families. It's strictly a class point of view."
There's ample evidence that government programs designed for poor black folks emphasize birth control and abortion availability, both measures obviously designed to limit black population. Comedian Dick Gregory, Ebony Magazine, 1971.
It takes little imagination to see that the unborn black baby is the real object of many abortionists. Irma Clardy Craven, Chairman, Minneapolis Commission on Human Rights and Secretary of the Urban League.
It was not until the mid-60s that blacks began to realize that what was called urban renewal was in fact what one black city planner labeled Negro removal. Roy Ennis, National Director, the Congress of Racial Equality, Ebony Magazine, 1974.
At one time, it was common to hear politicians and elected officials openly talking about the need for population control in the black community, or saying things like $1 spent on family planning is worth $5 spent on economic development. But since we don't hear that sort of thing anymore, it would be easy to conclude that the government is not still involved in black genocide, but that's not the case. It's no longer necessary for the government to be directly involved in black genocide because that's what they hired Planned Parenthood for. I mean, it can't just be a coincidence that at the same time when government population control programs were backing away from specifically targeting black neighborhoods, at that same time, the state and federal funding for Planned Parenthood was being increased by leaps and bounds. To understand the magnitude of the dollars involved here, remember this. By 1970, Planned Parenthood was already the 19th largest health-related fundraising organization in the country. But by year 2000, it had moved into third place behind only the American Heart Association and the American Cancer Society. And a major factor in that phenomenal growth was government funding. Basically, what's happened over the last 40 years or so is that Planned Parenthood has taken billions in government money while locating the vast majority of its facilities in minority neighborhoods. And that has not only been a tremendous boost for the eugenics movement, but it has also allowed government-funded family planning programs to target the black population while insulating the government from any direct connection to black genocide.
One of the places where government money has been used to advance the eugenics agenda has been in the public school system. Although government-funded population control programs can be found in white schools, the evidence is that they are significantly more likely to be targeted at black schools.
One example of this was seen in 1986, when it was discovered that Illinois public schools were not only distributing birth control to children, but that every one of the 50 facilities involved were in minority neighborhoods. When this information was made public, a local African-American pastor organized a campaign to stop the program. Reverend Hiram Crawford labeled the project genocide, saying that the obvious goal was to go after the Hispanic and black population.
That same pattern was also found in Maryland in the 1990s. Even though the state's teen pregnancy rate was higher among white students than black students, when the contraceptive device Norplant was introduced, it was selectively marketed to children as young as 13 in predominantly black schools in Baltimore. The result was that of the first 350 girls implanted at a local middle school, 345 were African American. Then, when Norplant was approved for general distribution, of the first 100 schools selected, all 100 were in minority neighborhoods.
The Norplant contraception device was developed by the Population Council in New York, which had been established in 1952 under the leadership of its president, John Rockefeller. Its next two presidents, Frederick Osborne and Frank Notestein, were both former members of the American Eugenics Society, and Notestein would later serve on the National Advisory Council of Planned Parenthood.